Welcome to another episode of the Halftime Podcast, brought to you by halftimecuppa.com. My name is Danny Cook, and I'm pleased to bring you another fantastic episode today with a very star-studded panel of Max Hayes, Robert Amanze, and Charlie Pumfrey. So before we begin, you can of course catch up with any of our previous episodes now on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as our website at halftimecuppa.com. So, without delay, let's get into today's podcast. Let's start with Robert Amanze. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Danny. Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to this.
Good. I say every time we do one of these, Rob, I have to admire your Skype picture. It is literally incredible.
That's very much an in-joke. That's very much an in-joke, isn't it?
It is, I guess. But yeah, fancy dress-wise, only the best people come as Mr. Incredible.
Well, thank you,
I've
sir.
heard, so I've been told.
Like you.
Joining Rob, we have Charlie Pumfrey. How are you,
Hello.
Charlie?
I'm good, Danny. I'm
Good.
anchoring the team, anchoring them down probably.
The defensive midfielder.
Oh no, I was more like weighing everyone down, but we're all good.
No, not at all.
It's all
And completing today's panel, we have Max Hayes. How are you, Max?
I'm all right, thanks, Danny. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. What have you been up to during lockdown, Max?
I've been quite busy, to be fair. It's a lot of people will probably be a bit bored out their brains in lockdown, but I've been really busy. I've been filming a lot of kind of stay-at-home content and bits and pieces. So it's probably helping me. It's keeping me occupied, keeping the mind good. So yeah, I'm just trying to stay busy. It's just such weird times, really.
Mm-hmm. And how have you coped without football? Because given there's no Saturday 3 p.m, what do you do with your Saturdays now?
Sit in the garden sunbathing. To be honest, Danny, I'm really struggling without it, and I think a lot of people are. So I'm hoping for it to come back, but it's probably not looking that likely for it to return anytime soon, which is going to be a massive shame, of course.
Mm. And that's you brought us nicely onto the topic of today's podcast.
Oh, there you go then.
There you go, smoothly done. So today's topic is obviously how the elite level of the game. So we're talking obviously League Two have decided a few things this week in terms of promotions, relegations, but League Two upwards, so League One, Championship, and more so Premier League, how they go about restarting. So I guess the best place to start would be at the very, very top, and our resident Liverpool fan, Robert Amanze. Let's go to you, Rob. How do you think the Premier League could restart?
I like how you start off with Liverpool fans. So there's going to be a bias, in my opinion. There won't be. I honestly admit that. But it's going to be difficult. I think it's a good question to ask. I mean, the tests that they've done this week, I think there were 740 in total of all the Premier League clubs. Surprisingly, Norwich weren't involved in that, Danny. So maybe you can fill us in on that reason why.
Yeah.
Cost too much money, bless them.
No, they just on that, they returned the following day. And I follow obviously a few local journos in that area, and they said they all tested fine. So. But I think it was the following day. They were the one club that just did theirs a little bit late. That was all.
I see.
For some reason.
Okay.
Get them cheaper.
Second hand.
It's going to keep buying shots.
Second hand, yeah. Weekly swaps, yeah.
They're waiting for Super Drug.
Carry on, Rob.
But from those 740 tests, 6, as you guys may already know, are come back positive, which still a worry because it's 6, but that's a lot lower than I think most people expected. So I think, to answer your question as present moment of time, safety measures have been put into place. They're on I think it's stage 1, which is training in small spaces and not within groups. I think the question will be really is they're doing other tests again today, I think. And if any more numbers have risen, I think that may delay the restart. But if not, I think at the moment they're going to go ahead with a potential restart, I think, on June the 12th. So they're going to give everyone about 3 to 4 weeks of training where it'll probably be small-sided games and then contact and go from there. So at the moment, they're making it as safe as possible within each club. And I believe general consensus will be, and if the numbers stay low regarding positive tests, that they'll go ahead with very little, I guess, concern.
Let's bring Charlie into this. So, Charlie, what's your thoughts on Project Restart? And I guess more so, as Rob sort of alluded to, the 3 to 4 weeks for a mini pre-season. Do you think that's long enough?
I imagine it'll change on a case-to-case basis. I can apologise for the background noise. Some people didn't get the hint that we were recording.
Are they here?
Yeah, funnily enough, we made this joke before the pod started. Someone actually is, which, is always useful. I'll try and speak over it. Hopefully you can't hear it.
No, we can't hear it. It's good.
Well, that's good then. I was panicked. This whole Project Restart, it's being done in consultation with the club, which I think is the one thing you have to do. But I worry that the players aren't being part of that conversation necessarily as they should be. I mean, I know as on a Brighton basis, I know that Lewis Dunk and Glenn Murray were involved in the conversation, so captain and one of the older statesmen of the team. But then when you look at the situations of, there are going to be players that aren't going to go back. I mean, you look at N'Golo Kante saying he won't go back for fears of the coronavirus, which is everyone is fair to have that decision. I think that's totally within the players' rights to say no at this time. I mean, look at Troy Deeney, some of the stick he got for not wanting to go and put his 5-month-old child at risk by going back to training. I think the problem is it wouldn't really matter how long you gave the clubs. If you went and said they're going back now, but our first game isn't until September, so say if the season had been cancelled and they said, the season's going to start on time as it would do, or a little bit later than it would do in September, you might still find that something happens in August, late August, so the second wave, fingers crossed that doesn't happen, but it could happen. And then we're missing half of the squad's gone. You look at Dynamo Dresden over in Germany. They had almost their whole squad were being told to self-isolate. So if you had that with how do you play football and have the whole squad missing, how do you play those games? Do we push games back? And the problem is it should be an issue now for the ongoing future until a real solid vaccine is proven and gets widespread sort of approval. It's going to be really difficult. And I can understand why this has come about, and we do need to look at getting things back like football. That if everyone's happy, if we can have the right testing. I mean, look at the Bundesliga; they've managed to make it work. I think it's reasonable, but I can understand why it might fall apart.
Okay. Let's bring in Max. Max, Project Restart, in terms of a championship perspective, you're obviously a big Nottingham Forest fan, and you're currently 5th. 10 points really off of West Brom, who obviously occupy the second automatic promotion space. What's your thoughts on Project Restart?
It's a really difficult one because I just thought I had muted myself for a minute then, but I think you can hear me.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult one with football, and especially with the teams that are in the promotion spots or obviously playoff spots, and especially those teams who are in the relegation places, because the fans might always, and I will be honest here, I want the season to restart because Forest still have a chance of obviously going up to the Premier League, the playoffs and everything like that. And obviously the teams in the relegation zone will probably not want the season to restart because they don't fancy going down a league. But ultimately, it's going to be much more difficult in the Championship because of the playoff system, really. With the Premier League, if they did, for example, call the season complete void and just gave Liverpool the champions and then maybe relegated the teams, or I don't know how that would really work, but it's more difficult for the Championship and the lower leagues because of the playoff system, and then you've got all that going further down the leagues with Bury and what happens with all the other places there. From a Forest fan point of view, of course, you want the season to restart, but then a lot of Forest fans are saying, well, yeah, but do we want it to restart? Because if Forest, they play the playoffs and we go up, none of the Forest fans will be able to see it and be there in person. And I think that'd be pretty bad. So for me, I would actually probably want them to, if Forest had to, play the playoffs behind closed doors, I wouldn't be too fussed if we lost. I'd rather us just go again next season. And if we did go up, then I could actually see it in person. From just a personal point of view, and probably using the aspect of people's health and keeping people safe, then it's probably best if I think, in my opinion, that the season's not played behind closed doors. It's just called, in my honest opinion, probably called complete void, and then kind of work out a way of promoting the teams and how that would work. I don't know. Like I say, in the Premier League, it'd probably be easier to do, but it's still got to be fair. It's still got to be fair. Liverpool deserve to be the champions. They have run away with it, and it's the same for teams like Leeds as well and West Brom. They deserve to go up, really, because we kind of knew from the start of the season when they were competing in the top two places that they were going to go up. So yeah, it's just such a difficult topic, really, and everyone's got their own view to it, really.
And going back to Charlie, as Max has kind of mentioned there, the promotion and relegation situation is slightly different. I don't know if you shared that view, having heard the stories, obviously, this week about, I think Charlton have been very vocal on TalkSport. I think Lee Bowyer has come out and sort of said, why if we are to call the season now and all places remain as they are and teams get relegated, why should they go down when they were outside the bottom three until the latest game? So I don't know if you had a thought on that, Charlie. Well,
this is the situation we're in. If you call the season now, and this is what leagues are discovering, I think, around the way. When you look at the Belgian leagues, had to have that conversation, and they've found their resolution on it. For me, I imagine in the Championship, from what I'm hearing from people that seem to know what they're on about, is that it sounds like League One might not be back next season. That League One might go into hibernation of some sort. So if you turned around and said, all right, well, let's not relegate anyone from the Championship for next season because they don't really need to, and then just relegate the extra teams the season after, and just say, look, you wanted to be in the Championship for another season, we'll have to play more games. And if it's going to be behind closed doors, and you'd probably have to condense where the games are being played, a bit like what the NBA are doing. Probably not to quite that level where you play in one venue, but you'd have to condense where the games were played. And the problem is there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers out of this. That there will be teams, it's how Scotland have resolved it. Hearts have said they're looking at taking legal action against the Scottish Premier League because they're getting relegated as a result of this. There are going to be teams that are going to miss out, and it's this idea that clubs are doing it clubs are making certain announcements about what they're doing and coming back because of ulterior motives. This idea that, my club Brighton have come in for more stick than I'm even vaguely comfortable with when it's come to what they've said. What the players have said. Glenn Murray gave an interview where he said he wasn't sure if he felt a little bit like players were lab rats, which isn't a sentiment that's been hasn't been shared by other people. You look at Danny Rose has come out and used those exact words. Sergio Aguero said he wasn't happy coming back. I think a lot of this, you can put all the planning in the world. If the players turn around and say the season's not happening, it just won't happen. You can't have the Premier League. As much as everyone want it back, the broadcasters aren't going to want a Premier League back where it's just a load of reserve players that want to, like, replacement players. And I think you're just going to get to a situation where you're going to have to be creative with the solution. It's going to have to be, when we look at the Premier League, are you going to be able to relegate any team from the Premier League now, really? Because no team was relegated at this point. I'm just going to get the Premier League table up quickly while we're talking. No team is down. There's only 6 points between 17th and Norwich and 20th. Which, with 9 games left, teams have overturned bigger deficits. So how do you turn around to Norwich and go, oh no, sorry, your chance at the £100 million you're losing out on next season, which you might be less now, we're in a situation. Yeah, you're just not going to get a chance to try and keep that. It's impossible. And for me, you're going to have to come to some sort of compromise. You're going to have to say, unfortunately, it might have to be that Norwich might have to go down. You bring up the 2 teams from the Championship and relegate 4 teams next season rather than relegating 3. The solution isn't going to be perfect, and that's the problem. Is that people expect a perfect solution that suits everyone, and that's just not how any of this is going to play out. There will be, like I say, there will be winners, there will be losers, there will be teams that will. And I worry that will lead to quite severe legal action against whichever divisions make their decision. I mean, if you look at the Championship, if they say only the top 2 are going up, then every team in the playoffs is going to kick off. If they say that everyone's going to go down that's currently in the relegation zone, you're going to have legal action. So there will be politics at play. There will be. I mean, you look at Barnsley at the moment are now pushing, saying they'll sue if the league don't fill out on financial fair play issues. Like, clubs are now doing everything I think they can to make sure that financially they're stable enough. And I think that's where this all comes to be honest.
Yeah. I certainly get that impression as well. Rob, from a Liverpool fan's perspective, how would being awarded the title feel for you? And there's talks of, obviously, if that was to be the case, they'd always have that asterisk next to their name in terms of champions. Do you feel that that's a valid point made, and is that a concern that you have?
Yeah, I do think that's a valid point regarding the asterisks. A lot of Liverpool fans would probably say, "Oh, yeah, but we're 25 points clear of the second place team, which is Manchester City. The third place team can't catch us. It's all over." But stranger things have happened. If we do return to the Premier League football in June as proposed, then what state of fitness and performance will each team be at? So there's a question mark of whether or not Liverpool can get those next 2 wins to clinch the title. It may be a situation where they might lose a couple of games going forward or draw a couple of games. You really don't know. So I think the team that wins the title this season really should be a team that earns it by finishing the season with the maximum amount of points. I know, for example, in France, in Ligue 1, PSG were awarded the title and they were similar to Liverpool, as in they were quite significantly ahead of the second place team, but I really don't feel that's comfortable. I mean, I know the most important factor here is people's health and whether or not it's necessary to return to play football at any level. But if the league is going to restart, then I think most Liverpool fans, and obviously speaking here from a personal perspective, would like the opportunity to go out and actually achieve winning the title rather than being awarded it by default.
And Rob, there's been, I guess, sort of another conundrum that the Premier League sort of have to consider is the Champions League and Europa League spots. Did you have any thoughts as to how they could be decided or determined?
I think the Premier League is slightly more fortunate than the Championship League 1 and League 2, as there are less games to play between now and the end of the season. And if the season doesn't go ahead and it is ending right now, then even though it's probably not the fairest way of looking at it, I do feel that those Champions League places and Europa League places should go to the current incumbents. So whoever is 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd and 2nd now will get either into Europa League or into the Champions League.
What, exactly as they are now, Rob?
Exactly as they are now, yeah. That's what I would suggest.
Even though Sheffield United have a game in hand?
That's the issue, and I'm fully aware of that. As a Villa at the bottom have got a game in hand as well.
Well, this is what would you finish as it is now and maybe take a game off everyone? So you'd bring everyone to 28 games?
That's a possibility. Yes, yeah.
So they won't have the amount of games.
Because there's a points per game like algorithm that people looked at as well that you can work out.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the weighted points per game. Is this where you're looking?
Yeah.
So rather than just points per game, because I mean, as a Brighton fan, I know that would probably favour us because we've got quite a few big teams left to play. Not suggesting, obviously, this is where the issue comes with the suggestions of. Which you're right. I think if we do cancel the season, it's going to have to be we're going to have to finish the table in a format it's in right now, really. But you can't I think there'll be quite a big severe, like the knock-on as well. We're talking about these Champions League spaces. Sorry, Rob, I've hijacked your.
No, it's good
your
stuff.
time. Feel free to shut me up. The issue that is also going to come into hand, that 5th place is going to be a dogfight this season because, I mean, what do we say the league was coming back? The 12th of June is what they've mentioned, isn't it? Around that sort of time.
Yeah.
And then we're really, that week before, Man City have their appeal against their Champions League ban on the 8th, from the 8th to the 10th of June. And there could be a situation where they're told they're not going to the Champions League next season, and that 5th place is a Champions League spot. So if you're Sheffield United, you potentially, if the table were to end as it is now, you're missing out on a Champions League spot potentially, which is mightily unfair, I'd say.
Yeah,
on a team, and it'd be any team. If it was Man United, if it was Sheffield United in 5th and Man United in 7th, and if the boot was on the other foot, you'd say the same thing. I think you have to be fair for everyone. But I say you'd have to maybe bring the game back one game and let the table lie as it lies there. Would be how I'd probably do it.
I don't know. I mean, taking away a game, I think is a hard thing to do.
It is
taking away a game that happened. But in the same sense, if you're adding points on, you're adding points for a game that didn't happen as well. So swings and roundabouts. Yeah. Back to you, Rob. I want you to obviously finish what you needed to say on the Champions League and European spots.
No, I think Charlie made a good point there, and yeah, I mean, I'm aware Charlie quite rightly pointed out that some teams play one game less, but I'm generally at a point, folks, where I'm like, well, what can we do? I mean, the taking the game off is an option, but if someone's won that game, then why shouldn't they have it declared as a win, for example? And why should a team that lost get the opportunity back that they shouldn't really have got because they lost that game? So it's tricky. I mean, from my perspective, I just think, even though it's probably not the most, from a morale perspective and probably from a fair perspective, it's probably not the safest, but I really do feel we've got to find a way of playing behind closed doors or finishing it from a Premier League perspective, because it's only 9 games, finishing the season, to end all these discussions of what we do if, basically.
What about? Okay. I'm going to pitch something, Danny. As
go for it.
That's been mentioned and has been, again, I'm going to refer back to the American sports because they've got their own way of dealing with this whole situation. What if we were to sort of band teams in positions? So you say Liverpool won the league. They're 25 points clear. I don't think any other team in the league, from what I've heard, would be that annoyed if Liverpool were just to be handed the title. You're 25 points clear. You've won 9 more games than the next team. I don't think any idea that Liverpool aren't deserving champions, I think, is only fueled by jealousy and wanting to, have for yourself. It's not. Man City fans will have to just deal with the fact they didn't win the league this year. They've not been good enough. They can whinge about it for the rest of the time. And then what I would do, I'd probably bracket from. So difficult. Would you put teams into a sort of a tournament to see who gets these places? And so in hockey, they're doing a tournament where you play. So teams that aren't in the playoffs. I don't want to explain too much about how the NHL system works, but they're playing sort of a 24-team tournament to see who's going to win that. But in this situation, could you have maybe for that last Champions League spot? Would you say maybe Leicester and Man City can have second and third, and then have a playoff between Chelsea, United, Wolves, Sheffield United, Tottenham, Arsenal, and then as far down as you kind of want? Would you have that rather than having to play all these games that are left? Would you have some sort of system? And you could probably have the same at the bottom, to be honest. And it'd probably have to be from Brighton down to Norwich, and have sort of these 6-team tournaments that they've been talking about, and letting teams play that way. Because playing the league system as it is going to be difficult.
I think the only concern I had with that idea, firstly, I think from a spectacle, I think that would probably be a hell of a lot more interesting than watching sort of mid-table games where there's nothing left to play for. Like, at least every game there's something on the line ultimately. I don't. For me, I think it's a question of where the cut-off point would be. And you're right in terms of like the Liverpool one is so clear and obvious. They're in a separate band to themselves, but you know, it's where I guess the margin, and you look down more so, and again, maybe not so much in the Premier League, but you look lower down into Championship, and I mean, obviously League One, slightly different entity, but if you look how close it is there in terms of their promotion and title challenges, like that's so close that I think even Ipswich, you know, has slid down to sort of 10th or mid-table.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, they're in 10th as of right now. But I think when we're talking about League One, if we're going to pivot slightly, it sounds like their league's being cancelled. Like that's what I've been seeing from clubs that have been talking about it. I think I saw someone from Wimbledon was suggesting the other day that it looks like that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Which it's going to have a knock-on effect all the way out the leagues. You look at League Two, have already made that decision for themselves. That they're already talking about promoting teams up to League One. Well, then how do you decide? I mean, as sad as it is for Bolton, they probably have to go down. Yeah, who do you send down? How do you work that out? There's a team that are clearly, obviously, but Tranmere have a game in hand. Like there are teams that could get themselves out of trouble.
Yeah.
And they're just being, and then look at Coventry at the top. They're 5 points clear. Would you say, okay, Coventry, they're 5 points clear with a game in hand? Is that enough of a gap? With what is that, 11 games left?
Fair question, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, not 11 games, I guess, because there's one less team in that division. I mean, that's the one bit of breathing room they have, is that there is one less team in that division. So if they were to take one more, and you were to sort of work out, okay, Barrow got to... It's so difficult because there are so many knock-on effects. A decision made at the Premier League is going to have knock-on effects in League Two. Like there will be, if you don't relegate teams from the Premier League and say to the Championship, we're not bringing anyone in, you can't do that from a contract perspective anyway. The contract between the Football League says that there must be promotion and relegation. That there must be teams going down, there must be teams going up. You'd have to negotiate some sort of system that says, well, we're not sending anyone down and we're not bringing anyone up. And that ultimately, I worry that all this is not going to be decided on a sporting level. It's going to be decided on a legal level.
Yeah.
Bournemouth are going to be relegated on goal by one goal.
And the trouble is with the Championship, for example, is from the sixth place where Preston are with 56 points. You've probably got down to 12th place where Derby are with 51, probably 11th actually where Swansea are with 53. And all those teams there outside the playoffs will want to take legal action because they are only 3 points off the playoffs and still have a good chance of, if the season was continued as normally, of getting in the playoffs. So like you said, Charlie, I completely agree with you on that this will not be settled in a put everyone's health first way as well, and probably sporting way. It's going to be done by taking it to the courts most likely, and certain teams are going to whinge and everything. So, you know, it won't be resolved. I think the EFL and the Premier League have got to put out kind of big statements and firm statements and take control of the situation soon rather than later, and try and resolve it in a sporting way and not let it get
I think that's what we're seeing. And
not get it too legal, because then otherwise I think it's a disaster waiting to happen, to be honest.
I'm really interested to find out your thoughts as a collective. So I'll go to Max first, but your thoughts on whether, if points per game was to be used, whether it should be weighted or unweighted, depending on obviously opposition. Just to add a little bit of context just before I go to Max, Norwich, who are obviously bottom, they still have, I think, 6 home games, or they would still have 6 home games against teams around them. And I think there's only 1 or 2 games they've got left to play against top teams. So from a Norwich fan's perspective, I would feel a little bit hard done by in terms of points per game, because we have played the majority of our hardest fixtures. So Max, what's your thoughts?
If, again, like you said, Danny, when you were on about from a Norwich point of view, from a Forest point of view, if it was done on points per game, we'd stay where we are. I think we'd still be fifth. In my honest opinion, I don't think points per game should be used. I think that it should be decided by the way it is now. So, and that obviously, like I said earlier, is going to kick off a lot of legal action with the teams outside the playoffs. Yeah. But it should be decided, in my opinion, on where everybody is now. So Forest stay fifth, Brentford stay fourth, Preston stay sixth, Leeds stay first. And then again, even though West Brom will go up, West Brom might kick a fit about, for example, not winning the title because West Brom are only 1 point off Leeds, but then Leeds have won.
I think promotion will be the discussion. I think most teams will button it up and shut up. If West Brom are being told they're getting promoted 9 games before the end of the season, I think they'll just keep stum.
Take it.
But the trouble is, I mean, I would take it, of course, if Forest went up through the playoff system, if that was played behind closed doors, for example. But it's like you get to the Premier League next season and you just feel, for example, let's say on the first opening day of the Premier League, Forest get Norwich, or probably not. No, sorry, Dan, probably not.
That's why you said Norwich.
Wow.
Like 17 other teams.
Let's say Forest get United. You'd go to the City Ground and you'd think, oh, well, we've got promoted, but it just doesn't feel like we've celebrated it and it doesn't feel proper. I would actually rather Forest lose in the playoffs behind closed doors if that was the case, and not go up this season and start again fresh next season, and hopefully coronavirus won't stop me seeing Forest trying to get promoted. But at the end of the day, everyone's health obviously comes first, the players, staff, everybody involved with football. But going back to your question and point, Danny, I just don't think points per game would work, and that's probably going to cause a lot of people to kick up a fit about
that. Let's bring in Rob. Rob, points per game. What do you think?
Yeah, I've got to agree with Max there. I just feel very uncomfortable with the thought of, particularly when you use the context, Danny, what you mentioned about Norwich there regarding favourable fixtures that have coming up at home. I'm just very uncomfortable with the thought of points being decided without a game being played. It just doesn't seem right to me, and it's done. I know for health reasons it's definitely proposed, which is why we're talking about it. But I'm really keen not for that option to be given, purely because it's taken out of the hands of the players. They can't control anything. It's down to working out algorithms and numbers, and rather than them going onto a football pitch and winning that game. So yeah, I'm not a fan of it, even though I appreciate why it's being considered right now.
That's really interesting, Rob. Were you talking there about the decision being taken out of the players' hands? If obviously there are players that, like I said earlier, are rightly saying they don't want to play, do you not think it's a little difficult for those same players to turn around and say, well, we don't want to play, but we don't want the season to end? That we'd be leaving clubs in a sort of limbo?
Yeah. That is the biggest issue, is that we're talking about now about the possibility of the Premier League and League, and Championship particularly right now. We mentioned League One might not restart. But there's some players, as we all of us know, who have aired their worries about coming back. But if they don't play, but other players in that team play as well, I mean, we're not looking at the moment anyway that there'll be 12 players per squad missing. There's going to be maybe 1 or 2, unfortunately, that have made a decision that they don't feel safe, which is right for them. So the teams, I still feel then, if the games go ahead, have more of a chance of deciding what's going on, rather than go for the option of, no, we're going to not play and we're going to go through this points per game system and let that work. Because even if 2 or 3 players don't play per club, there's still enough of the players available to play to determine the factors on the pitch. I think
that's really interesting. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I think you make some really good points. What I would say though, if you're Watford, are you saying to Watford that you have to play even though your captain doesn't want to play? Because that's quite a big. Troy Deeney's a talisman for that team, and he has been part of the reason they've made sort of the resurgence that they've made. I think that would be a real struggle to tell Nigel Pearson that, oh yeah, you've done all this great work, but you can't have your striker for the last 9 games of the season. I
think that's a great question, and one that it's really difficult to answer. I'd love to hear a Watford fan perspective on that, because I'm not sure Andre Gray or Isaac Success or anybody else in that Watford front line could do the same job with Troy Deeney over the next 9 or 10 games, depending on what's going on there. So yeah, it's a real issue. I mean, Chelsea won't potentially have N'Golo Kante available. I know Chelsea seem as a different bracket because they've got so many world-class players in their team that can maybe compensate for that, whereas Watford couldn't. I mean, is a possibility that if there are more thorough testing being done within the next couple of weeks, and I mean, I know Troy's very certain example because he's mentioned particularly about his child who's got
those are extenuating circumstances,
and also because he's mentioned the AME factor of the higher risk. But if there was more research done or more testing done over the next couple of weeks, which can give people some more reassurances. I mean, we don't know because this virus is malleable; it keeps changing, right? But I'm not certain that every player will not come back if there were more assurances made over the next couple of weeks of preventing the option of playing and give them maybe more certainty of what can happen if they do play. So my hope would be for Watford's case that Troy may miss the first 2 games of the restart, but may come back towards the end if some assurances have been made to help his safety and the team safety.
I just want to actually go back to Max quickly. Max, as obviously Rob and Charlie have brought up there, how would you feel if, say, Lewis Grabban decided he didn't want to play the remaining of Forest's fixtures? How would you feel about that?
I'd be completely fine with it. He's a human being at the end of the day. All footballers are, and I think that you will get, if footballers refuse to play, obviously, like Charlie mentioned earlier there, that Troy Deeney had already got a lot of stick, and he went on Good Morning Britain, and he got interviewed by Piers Morgan, and he said that Troy Deeney said that footballers will be blamed for taking the tests off other people that need them, whether that's key workers such as nurses, teachers, or whoever. So footballers will already feel a sense of blame on them already for taking the tests to obviously, and taking probably the funding for being tested for it. But then again, they are human beings, and at the end of the day, if, for example, Troy Deeney, Lewis Grabban didn't want to play because of their health and safety, or they have someone at risk in their family, or they didn't want to play because of their health and safety, then that's ultimately their decision. People will then say, well, maybe the footballers should be furloughed. But that's
a whole other topic. That one.
That's got its own problems. That one.
Well, exactly. So this is the trouble with it, is I guess that I just think that if footballers don't decide to play, then there's nothing the clubs can do about it, really. They don't want to play, then they don't want to play. But ultimately, if you're, take Matty Cash from Forest, or whoever, Matty Cash, who's probably a young lad and he wants to get back to his football, he'll be willing to play. So it all depends on your circumstances, your family circumstances, and how your life is. And do you have any other health issues? It's obviously normally with footballers, it could be like Troy Deeney with family health issues, which puts them in the risk category. So ultimately, it's a decision for the player to make, and the clubs and the leagues can't really do anything. And if Lewis Grabban decided that he didn't want to play because of somebody like he lived with his mum and his mum was at risk, then fair enough. There's nothing you can do to stop that, because ultimately they are human beings at the end of the day, and they are entitled to say that.
Do you think it should be put to a vote of some description then for the players? Because I think there is going to have to be a level of tolerable loss almost for players, as in loss as in not playing. Obviously, there's no tolerance for someone getting ill and passing away from this. But I think what we've seen from players, I think you need to go to the players and ask them for together. And we have these organisations that are meant to, even though they're run by morons like Gordon Taylor. And I'll say it strong. I've got no problems with it. Fine. The PFA has its own problems, and Dave Kitson isn't the answer. We have these organisations for a reason. I think if it was me, we need to work out whether football is coming back from a footballing perspective as well, like we're saying. If we go to the players, if 40% of the players say they don't want to play, you can't play. It's not possible. Yeah. If 30% say they don't want to play, you can't play. It's not possible. You can't take 30% of people's squads and say, no, you can't have them. They don't want to play. There'd be nightmares. People would be going to court all the time. What if all 3 of your starting goalkeepers say they don't want to play? How do you play with that? If all your strikers say they don't want to play? It just happens that way.
Then you put your midfielder in goal.
Well, as good as
That'll
John
be
O'Shea
fun.
was in goal, Phil Jagielka at Sheffield United would be born for this. I don't know if any club would want to
Can't wait to see
particularly live
Carl
with that.
Walker in goal again.
Because the trouble is if like you say, you go and ask these players and they say we don't want to play, and you get a high percentage of players not wanting to play, then the question is, well, you're back to square one, and you might as well have not said that you're going to restart and restarted training. So I think all leagues, and I'll keep saying this, they've got in the next few weeks, less than that really, next week. Because I don't know if the government are going to, obviously it's another topic, but I don't know if they're I don't know if they're releasing more information of what we can and can't do now. I'm relaxing or putting more restrictions in place again, but it depends. The leagues need to come out with a bold statement and make it clear to fans and make it clear to players, staff, and all the clubs, so everybody knows what's going to happen and knows what's going on. And whatever that will be, then I don't know. I'd hate to be the person in charge now. I'd hate to be the person writing the statements for the EFL.
I'd hate to be the person giving the statements, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Just moving on then. In terms of if football was to return, and I would imagine it's going to be in the state that's like German football at the moment, where it's behind closed doors. I really want to get your thoughts on whether that's a true reflection of the game, having the game behind closed doors, and then the added sort of cherry on top of the initial ideas being the games being played at neutral venues. So from what I understand, I think that's now been sort of pretty much scrapped, but would like your thoughts on that as well. So let's go to Rob first then.
In regards to is what we saw last week a true representative of football because of behind closed doors?
Yeah, and then obviously your views on if they did a complete U-turn and decide neutral venues is back on the cards.
I was quite interested by what Max said earlier about if Forest were to get promoted, but it was behind closed doors, he couldn't go to the City Ground to watch them. He wouldn't really enjoy it as much, which is fair, but then he'll say, he'd rather they didn't get promoted and it will be in a non-coronavirus world, whenever that may be. But I think the true state, folks, is that we've got to play probably behind closed doors for most of this calendar year, at the minimum. A vaccine's being tested, as we all know, and trials are going ahead. But I think for safety of mass gatherings, I doubt we'll be able to see games in groups at a stadium for a very long time. So this version of football, it's different, and it's probably not as enjoyable to hear the atmosphere of the ground with fans and people chanting and supporting their club. But to minimise the spread and the threat of the infection, it has to be done. It's quite cold, I know, and probably not enjoyable, as I mentioned, but football, if it does return, has to be done in the safest environment possible. If that means behind closed doors with social distancing in place and people do as much as they can to minimise the threat of coronavirus spreading, then let's do that. So it's novel and it's different, and it's weird hearing the fans not being there, and it's weird hearing the players talking to each other during the game, but it's necessary evil to make sure that people are safe.
Let's bring in Charlie. Charlie, what's your thoughts on obviously games being played behind closed doors without the fans, and the initial idea of playing them at neutral venues? If Charlie's there.
Whilst I mute myself.
There we go.
Yeah, while the idea of neutral venues, I kind of got it. Like, you want to avoid fans turning up to stadiums anyway. You're not going to be able to game that. If people want to go, if Liverpool fans want to go and be outside the stadium when they win the league, they'll go to Timbuktu. It's just not something you're going to be able to avoid. So I think that was quite quickly dispatched, because you can't play half a season in your own stadium with the same conditions and then play the last 9 games at Aston Villa's ground. As a Brighton fan, I don't want to see us get relegated in a home game against whoever we've got at Aston Villa's ground. I think that's just not. It wouldn't be palatable for fans. It would just cause resentment, I think, to be honest. that you're just clubs aren't and fans aren't going to want that. And I know my club came out were quite strongly against it. I think West Ham were for it actually at the time. West Ham said they were interested. I mean, their fans sit quite a distance from the pitch anyway, so social distancing is strong there.
Waiting for it.
But no, I think you play in empty stadiums. That's fine. I think if we're going to come back, you're going to have to do it in that sort of. We're not going to have fans in stadiums this calendar year. That seems to be the suggestion of every sport I've heard, that you're going to struggle to get fans back. And even when they come back, you're not going to have full capacity. It's just not going to be lights on, lights off in that situation. And we're going to need to play football at some point. There is going to need to be football at some point because the finances of the clubs won't hold out long enough for us to wait for fans to be back before we play. It's a lovely idea, and in an ideal world, it will be what we do. But it's not possible. It's not realistic to turn around to football clubs. I mean, there are already talks of dozens of clubs in League One and League Two that are going to need a bailout of some description from someone if they're not playing football for a while. Like, there are clubs that will go out of existence because of this. So if the Premier League can come back and can start to lead the way in that and prove that it works and prove that it's not a massive undertaking, and it will be to begin with, but if we can, like you say, if testing can get better and we can go along with no issues, then I think there's no issue with doing it safely in a considered manner, which is what they're doing. They're speaking to professionals, I'm sure of it. That is what we're going to have to do. And if it can come back before the end of July, it can come back before the end of July. If it ends up being August, it ends up being August. I think the one group of people I think are being, again, I used the word earlier, morons. I think UEFA are being the real morons in all of this. This idea that you're going to finish the Champions League this year is mental. It's just not going to happen.
Are they looking at September restart though for the Champions League?
August. They want it done by the end of August.
August. Oh wow. Okay.
It's ridiculous. Clubs aren't going to be able to travel. It's not possible. I don't think there'll be a Champions League next season. I don't think there'll be any European competition next season, which is crazy to say. But you're not going to be able to do it because countries aren't all just going to open their doors at the same time. And what do you say to clubs that play in other countries, play in countries where the situation is different? So at the moment, say Liverpool get into the Champions League, that's already done, and they draw Celtic. Even in the UK, Scotland's rules on sort of quarantining where they're playing are different. So how do you deal with that? How do you go? I mean, Man City are set to play Real Madrid in the Champions League. Our rules are different to Spain's rules. So how do Real Madrid deal with that? Like, doing the league within a nation's borders, and I mean it's going to be difficult here anyway. I mean in the Championship with Swansea and Cardiff, Wales's rules are slightly different to England's rules, so that's going to be a consideration if the league does come back. Within the country will be fine. Trying to play any sort of continental international tournament is impossible. There's a reason that Euro 2020 was canned so quickly, was sent to next year so quickly. Because it isn't going to be viable. It's not a viable situation now to play any sort of football beyond borders. It's not possible.
Let's go to Max now then. Max, how do you feel about football being played behind closed doors? And obviously the idea of neutral venues, whether that would be extended maybe to the Championship, probably not. I don't know. I've not heard any proposals on that. And I guess last point for you, Max. How would you do match day with Max behind closed doors?
Neutral venues is stupid. It's a ridiculous idea. There is no point of doing it. Like Charlie said, it will kick more uproar from the fans. It honestly angers me when it first came out. It made me so frustrated. Charlie mentioned there as well about rules being different with obviously Wales and Swansea and Cardiff, and that's why if they just called the season, for example, void in the Championship, but relegated the teams and promoted the teams and played the playoffs behind closed doors, for example, then that wouldn't really be a problem because obviously Wales and Swansea are not really in the playoff.
Not part of the conversation.
Well, yeah. To be honest, really, Charlie, that's my point ultimately. But no, playing games at neutral venues is stupid. Because you're more likely to go and get fans than going outside the neutral venues. I just think that it would be better for the players as well to play at their own club if it's going to be behind closed doors at their own ground, and that's the safest way. to your point, Danny, about how I'm going to do Matchday Max behind closed doors. To be honest, I don't know. In fact, what inspired me was that when the Bundesliga came back on last Saturday, I watched the Borussia Dortmund game, v Schalke, and the commentary team. I think it was Derek Ray or somebody actually put a thing on Twitter of him commentating from his office at his home. So he commentated from home, which completely shocked me because the way he actually commentated on it, I thought he was there, or at least outside maybe the Borussia Dortmund stadium and in a kind of TV box, but he wasn't, and he did it from home. So that inspired me a little bit. How I do it, so that's another question. Whether I was supposed to be doing, it was the FA Cup final today. Well, of course, I was supposed to be covering that for Mitre,
wow.
But of course, then I was getting, because last year I only first signed up with Mitre, but they promised me full media access at Wembley. So yeah, it's pretty frustrating waking up this morning knowing that I would have gone and done that today. But it is what it is. Everyone's in the same situation, and how I do Matchday Max from home is another question. Whether Mitre or whoever would be. Yeah, I mean, it's not a question. They're not going to let me in to any of the games. So, I don't think they'll even let obviously the commentators in or any presenters. It's really only cameramen, and I think they were on about I saw something from a journalist in the lower leagues about having cameras that are automatic and that they can be controlled from outside. So you reset
the NFL have spoken about that.
Yeah,
they want virtual cameras.
Yeah, so. So I don't know, to be honest, Danny. It's probably not. I will cross that bridge when I come to it. For the time being, I'm trying to do some stay-at-home stuff, but just getting a bit boring now. But it just is. It's what it is at the end of the day.
I look forward to seeing how creative you go.
Oh wow, yeah.
I think it'll be interesting. So I've got so many questions on this, but I am wary of time, and I'm going to limit it to two. We've got final two questions of the podcast. So let's go to Rob again. Rob, what happens if we restart and then a number of players from a team suddenly get ill with obviously coronavirus and they aren't able to field a side?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think Dynamo Dresden in Germany, I think Charlie mentioned earlier, had a similar situation last week. And I think their answer to the Bundesliga would be to quarantine that team for 14 days at least, and then hope that once that 14-day period is done and they're tested again, that either the virus is gone or at least the numbers affected have lowered. I think that's what they would like to do if that happens. But yeah, that's a difficult one because obviously you then stop that fixture or fixtures that team has got for a period of time yet again. So that's probably the worst nightmare for anyone if the leagues do restart, is if a team has an outbreak of the virus, because that completely puts that team and those fixtures aside for a amount of time.
What, just on that as an added one, what would happen from your perspective? You've obviously coached. You imagine you're coaching Liverpool or you're managing Liverpool, and it's that final game before you win the league title, and you've got to win this game, and you've suddenly woken up to the news that you've got Salah out with coronavirus, or not Kepa, sorry.
Alisson.
he always makes an appearance, Kepa, but no, Alisson, Alexander-Arnold, those guys all got the virus. What would you do?
I think the first thing is obviously you got to alert the league and basically say the game can't go ahead because of health reasons. I think it's a bit tribal, because I think some fans would probably be quite non-believing and think, oh, are they doing that deliberately to avoid something, or because players got injury rather than an illness?
That's definitely sentiment I've seen.
So I wonder if there could be some. I mean, I'm sure it'd be quite transparent, the amount of tests that are done to clarify the people who are positive. But I think the rule should be if a case comes up and someone fails the test and they're positive, and it's in the build up to a game, I think if there should be maybe like a certain number, like if it's more than 2 or 3, then the game has to be postponed. I think that'd be my suggestion.
Let's get Max's thoughts. Max, what do you think?
Oh, sorry, Danny. I think I lost you there.
No.
What on whether the league should. Sorry, I think.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, you may have lost me for a second there. That's all right. It's my internet. But say if Project Restart was to happen, we've restarted the leagues, and then suddenly Forest have got half their players out with coronavirus. And as I said, the other point which I said to Rob was, what happens if that's that final game, maybe that playoff final, and half your squad are out? What happens?
I don't know. The only thing I can say is that Forest have got quite a good academy set up, so we could always draft some of the young players in. That's probably the only option. If, like me and Charlie were saying earlier, and if it goes over a certain limit with players not wanting to play, or either just so many teams have to, for example, or have symptoms and have to go into the 14-day isolation period, then just call the season void. Just honestly, just call the season void. I think that's the only way if that happens. But ultimately, I wouldn't be too fussed if they brought some of the Forest youngsters in. And like I say, a lot of Forest fans will probably say right now, let's not go up this season. Let's do it next season. And why not? If we get to the playoff final and we've got nothing to lose, stick the youngsters out. If we win, brilliant, we go up. If we lose, well, oh well, we can blame it on COVID-19.
And Charlie, let's get your thoughts on this then.
Yeah, I think one thing that's not that good points. I echo the sentiment of both the guys. What I would say though is that we do need to have there should be some form of cut-off, I think, at some point for the league. We can't keep having teams going into isolation for 2 weeks forever. Otherwise, we'll end up having 2 Premier League games left to play, and there'll be pointless mid-table games almost inevitably, and the whole season will be held up for no reason. I think you need to have a point where you say, okay, we're going to say if all the games aren't done by, I mean, the UEFA have set a cut for the Champions League at the end of August. That's probably a little too soon, but if you get what I'm saying, there has to be a time where everyone needs certainty on it. And I think that's where the calls to to end the season now have come from. You can't, like I said, we can't null and void the season, but you will have to end it at some point. I think if we get to a point where positions are if all the teams are relegated that can be relegated, and all the teams are in sort of meaningful positions that are in meaningful positions, so 5th up to 1st are all settled almost. I think at that point you could probably say, all right, is there any point playing all these games? We'll just award teams the money they'll get from the position they're in, within reason, obviously. And we'll end the season on those sort of terms.
What prize money that isn't quite significant? The places in the table and prize money, particularly the Premier League?
Well, it's £2.5 million per position in the Premier League. But at the same time, if we're in a position where all the real, if you say to teams that, look, we're going to have to end the season where we are now so we can start a new season, and say, look, you're not going to get your money for next season until we start that new season, clubs might be a little bit more understanding when it comes to it. You don't want to be holding that money hostage. That's not the point. But you can't give money for a new season when there's still teams from the old season in the league. So that would be my only perspective on it. But I think, look at the Bundesliga. They've managed to play a whole weekend of fixtures with no problems. They're on to their next week of fixtures, no problems again. And to be honest, I mean, Germany's handling this whole thing's been better than ours. Let's not go too far into that. But if we can get to a situation where everyone's kind of in place, if we have 2 or 3 games left and everyone's sort of safe where they are, then I can't see a reason why you would want to drag the season out too long. Okay,
perfect. So our final question then, and I'm going to go obviously to you individually, but I want to know your thoughts on what you think will happen. So I know this is obviously hypothetical, with no one knows, but someone listening in, maybe the Premier League chief executive, maybe he's listening in. He may have to hire you off the back of your guidance and support. So, Rob, what do you think will happen? What's the outcome?
I think in the Premier League, despite the concerns, I think it will restart in June. And I think they'll do their best to complete the season before July, or end of July, should I say. In the Championship, it's really difficult because of the playoff situation that Max mentioned earlier. I think they'll do their best to complete the games. And what I think they may do with the playoffs is do away with the 2 legs. Maybe 1 leg to Fairs at neutral ground, and then have to final, which probably doesn't sound fair, but I think that's the option there. I think they'll do their utmost in the top 2 leagues anyway to avoid the need of going out of court and do settlements. I think they'll do their best to do it on the league and do promotion relegation as per normal.
What do you think?
Oh, was that me, Danny?
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
That's okay. What do you think?
The optimistic part of me hopes that we can get back to football on the 12th of June, play all the games, Brighton will stay up, and we can all be sitting here talking about a new season come August, like talking about preparing for a new season. But I worry that 1 second, sorry. Oh, pardon me. I worry that circumstances are going to cause, if the rest of our handling of this situation is to go by, I worry that things will happen that will take the decision out of people's hands, and we'll need to look at either ending the season or at some resolution. But I don't know. The positive part of me, and I'm going to go with that, is that the season will end. We'll have played all 38 games. Everyone will be happy, apart from those teams that aren't happy. But I mean, good luck with that. I'm trying to avoid that. And hopefully, everyone will be happy with that. There was a solution, that there was a resolution to the season.
Okay, Max.
Like Charlie says, ultimately I want football to return. Everybody does. I mean, my dream is for football to return with fans. That was not going to happen for a while. So, what I think will happen and should happen is that the Premier League should play all their games behind closed doors and try and maybe set an example to the other leagues, if not in England but around the world. And the Championship's too big. I think they should just call the Championship void and promote and don't do points per game. Promote Leeds, West Brom, do the playoff games, but then again it's relegation. How that works, I don't know. Probably just relegate the teams that are in there now. And if they moan, then they moan. That's just their problem because they've ended up in the relegation zone when this all happened. So, I just think that they've got to release bold statements, decide what they're going to do soon. And then the other leagues, I think League One will be cancelled, just like League Two has been. I won't be surprised if that happened by the end of this week. And obviously, I don't know, but if the Premier League chief executive is listening, or the EFL one is, I just think that they need to sort themselves out, release some statements, and make sure it's a fair, but also be strong. So don't give in to the teams that are moaning. Don't give in to the teams that want to take them to court. Put out bold statements and make a decision, and don't go back on it. And let's just hope that football does return sometime soon with fans.
Good statement there. I like that. So that brings us to the end of today's show. How can we follow you guys on Twitter and any other social media? Let's start with Max on this one. How can we follow you on socials?
Twitter, Max D Hayes, Max as well, if you want to check out my YouTube stuff. And pretty much posting a lot of things on there. Also doing some stay-at-home stuff with the Mitre and the BBC. So keep your eyes out for that.
Yeah, some good stuff there. Rob?
Thank you for having me on, guys. So my Twitter, which is not going to be interested in Max's or any stay-at-home staff. Will be Bobby, so Bobby, Manz, Manz.
Brilliant. And Charlie?
Much like Rob, I won't be. I'm not doing anything with the BBC, but hit me up.
It's at Brighton are going down.
Thanks, Max.
Ooh,
I look forward to not
handle.
playing Nottingham Forest
Great
next
handle.
season.
Yeah,
Thank
same.
you. You can find me at Charlie Pumfrey on Twitter. Nice.
Perfect. Nice. And you
Thanks
can, of
for
course,
having me
follow.
on, Danny.
Not a problem, Max. You can, of course, follow Halftime Cuppa on Twitter using our handle at halftime_cuppa. And my personal account, again, not as interesting as Max's, is at DannyCook1996. Should you wish to follow any really poor Norwich content. Yeah, another famous handle that will be. As mentioned at the real start of the show, all the previous episodes are available now on Spotify, iTunes, and our website, halftimecuppa.com, for catch-up, should you wish to listen. Thank you very much, guys. Really good podcast. Thank you all for coming on.
No problem at all. Cheers.
Thank you for having me, Danny.
Thank you, gents.
Until next time, stay safe and goodbye.